It's Radio Free 501c, the podcast of Rogue Tulips Consulting. We're here with Season 7. So glad you're joining us. I'm your host, Cecilia Supp, CAEACNP, and I'm so glad you're here for this exciting year of so many great topics, so don't forget to subscribe. He's back, one of my favorite guests, and I'm sure one of yours, Carl Weaver from Broken Column Press. He's brought me a question this week. How are associations like the Planet of the Apes? We're going to answer that and more. It's Monday, February 3rd, 2025. Episode 271 starts now. Everybody, it's Monday, February 3rd. Can you believe it's February already? I certainly can't. January flew right by. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Radio Free 501c. I'm your host, Cecilia Supp. I'm the principal and founder of Rogue Tulips Consulting, and I'm so glad you're here with us this week. If you have not taken a moment to subscribe or follow us yet on your favorite podcast service, please take a moment and do that because you don't want to miss any of our conversations like the one we're about to have this episode. My friend and publisher from Broken Column Press, Carl Weaver, is back, and he brought a question. But before we address his question, I want to say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you, wherever you may be in this big world of ours. And I hope you're having a great day and that you have a good week ahead. So, Carl, you're back. You have a question to bring us. But before you ask your question, could you say hello to the audience and tell them a little about yourself?
Hello, audience. I'm Carl Weaver. I'm the president of Broken Column Press, and we're a boutique book publishing company based in the Washington, D.C. area, working with various people, individuals, nonprofits, businesses, trying to get their stories out in print or in electronic form or whatever makes sense for their purposes. So that's a little about me. And I have a question for you, Cecilia.
Okay, great. Shoot, Carl, because I'm sure it'll be a good one.
It is, and it's something we've talked about often, and it's something that keeps coming up every time we're in with association colleagues. How are associations like the Planet of the Apes?
Wow, that is a great question. And I know you and I have pondered that question ourselves on many occasions. First of all, if people don't know the story of the Planet of the Apes, there are several different versions. There's the original novel, which was written by a French author. There's the movie series from the 70s, starring Charlton Heston during his cynical 70s period. And then there's that Mark Wahlberg one, which don't bother watching that one. Then there's that new James Franco series, which is actually pretty well done. So, yeah, I have noticed there's a lot of similarities between associations and the Planet of the Apes, but I'd love to hear your observations first.
Sure, yeah. One of the things I've found in that whole society of the apes is we never really learn why they're doing what they're doing. They have a confusion of purpose. I'm not sure they know what their mission statement is. Just like a lot of associations, they may have a mission statement, but when was it last updated? When is it used as a guiding document? And a lot of times you can tell it's not really being used that well. What do you think about that?
I think that's a really good point because everybody likes to say nonprofits of all kinds, specifically associations, are mission driven, but every organization is mission driven, which I've known for a long time, but people seem to forget that. That's not our differentiator, is that we're mission driven. What our differentiator is that our missions tend to be more focused on service and helping people and helping make the world a little bit better place wherever we happen to be. One of the things I've noticed similarities between Planet of the Apes and associations is that associations tend to be very focused on internal politics, too often to its detriment. They don't focus on the mission. They don't focus on the vision. So if we look at the Planet of the Apes series, for example, different kinds of apes have different kinds of jobs. So in the original series with Charlton Heston, you have the chimpanzees are the scientists, the orangutans are the governance people. They run the government. They might also be considered bureaucrats, but not in a bad way. But that's just what they do. They work for the government. And then you have the gorillas, who are totally miscast as the military arm because gorillas are actually pretty laid back. But in that tier system that they have, people have very specific assignments, very specific roles, and then they tend to fight with each other instead of working together as a team.
Yeah, and it's funny, so there's not only the friction that you're talking about that we see in associations and apes on the planet, but there's also, the issue that you mentioned about them not being put in the right spot, for
Mhm.
their strengths. And that is a big thing I see in associations. I mean, with member, obviously with, people being, volunteers for an association or for a special interest group or what have you, or even with staffing. I've seen a lot of places where I worked at a place where there was someone who had a master's degree in HR studies, and she was nowhere near the HR department. They didn't want to put her there. They put someone else in charge of HR who didn't really have any experience with it. You see goofy stuff like that all the time.
Wow, yeah. So misalignment of experience, knowledge, skills. We do
Hmm.
unfortunately see that a lot because anything in human society is going to be influenced by personality. It's going to be influenced by connections. It's going to be influenced by how persuasive you are. But when we start letting that distract us from our purpose of building a good society, or in this case, a strong association team, then that really does get in the way a lot. One of the other things that you and I were kind of wondering as we prepared for this episode is where in the heck does the government and the Planet of the Apes story get their money? Like, where does revenue come from? And I don't think there's a good answer to that.
No, and a lot of times, I mean, I think that the society gets the money from the government. I don't see anybody. Was there anyone, conducting commerce in Planet of the Apes?
I'm
Someone
trying to
had
remember.
to.
Yeah, I don't recall seeing that. And I think the scientists are all getting government grants and
Hmm.
government funding, which I know a lot of different kinds of nonprofits, associations too, get grant funding from the state and the federal level. So maybe that, but then where are they getting their money? Is it the slave trade? Because we do know, at least in the original Charlton Heston movie series, that they bought and sold humans.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
like cattle basically, and then they would try to train them to do things for them. So which is of course in the original movie series is what drove the battle for the Planet of the Apes, because they had trained the apes to like be their servants, and then they got mad and chaos ensued and then
Hmm.
they took over. So there was a big war. So when we start pushing people away and saying you're only good for this low level task, it kind of makes people angry. So, we don't want to do that. Like we don't want
Yeah.
to be exclusionary. I think that's something that happens. My opinion, go ahead, send the angry postcards. I can handle it. My opinion is we tend to be too exclusionary in associations, specifically in our membership groups. We have this attitude, this perception that it's run by a clique or a small group of people. And that unfortunately tends to be the case.
Hmm.
You might say, well, these are the interested people, these are the people who step up. But are we making sure that the people who are interested in stepping up are not keeping other people out? Like in organizations with no term limits, which I didn't see any term limits in Planet of the Apes. I could be wrong.
Yeah, Dr. Zayas was just in power forever, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and that stratification, it's in associations or not, various nonprofits, what have you. It's hard to jump from that, from the chimpanzee level to the orangutan level. Like you're never going to jump that, and that's a problem in associations with membership and with volunteers, as you're saying, and also staffing. There are different levels of staff, and for them to advance, they have to leave and go somewhere else. But wouldn't it be better and cheaper to just keep them on?
Yeah.
A lot of uh, small cone of vision there with some groups.
I think that is a very good point because we tend to lose people because of the unfortunately exclusionary way we do things. And one of the problems is we copy each other. Oh, well, this association's doing that. We're going to do it too. Well, that might not work for your group. And frankly, it's probably not working for theirs either. but
Mm-hmm.
they're probably doing it because they saw somebody else do it. So it doesn't make it right. Like Cheryl Ronk likes to say, two wrongs don't make a right. It's an old saying, but she says that, especially when we're talking about ethics.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at ethics in associations and ethics in the Planet of the Apes, how ethical is it to have a society that's so stratified that you cannot move from one group to the other? Like your good point, you didn't see a lot of the chimpanzee class moving into government or the military. You didn't see, maybe some of the gorillas would like to leave the military and go work for the scientific part of the society, but there isn't any movement, and so societies where there's no movement tend to stagnate. And so that's why in associations we want to have term limits. We don't want Dr. Zayas running things, because one of the other problems we see with Dr. Zayas in the original movie with Charlton Heston is he hides a lot of information from people,
Mm-hmm.
because he thinks it's for their own good. And so there we have that lack of transparency.
Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah. Yeah, the lack of transparency is a big one. I mean, part of it, it's sort of set up that way because Charlton, if you haven't watched the movie, I'm not going to give away anything here, but he doesn't know where he is. He but Dr. Zayas, to your point, knows a whole lot of stuff that he's keeping, not just from what was his name? Taylor, I think,
Yes,
in the
Taylor,
movie.
or Bright Eyes if you're Kim
Right,
Novak.
right, Bright Eye. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff hidden from him, but a lot of stuff just hidden from everyone,
Mhm.
in that society. That's just not right, but is pretty familiar.
Yeah. Well, and it is, unfortunately. I mean, I worked in several different kinds of nonprofits and associations, and you're sometimes told don't say anything. Uh,
Hmm.
the members don't need to know this, or the board might know something, they're not going to tell the members, whatever the background is. If somebody gets fired, you're not supposed to talk about it. You're not supposed to say that person got fired, no matter how bad of a hit it took on morale.
Hmm.
Because what you see there is, like in the Planet of the Apes, they're a very strict society with a lot of rules, and they have a lot of laws in their society. But there's also not a lot of questioning allowed. There's not a lot of talking about, why do we do things this way again? You're not supposed to, you get in trouble, be quiet. And we hear that a lot, I think, in associations. Unfortunately, I think that is part of who we are, is don't question, don't say
Hmm.
anything. We see this in the groups that we as professionals belong to, that we're not supposed to say anything, don't bring it up, don't mention things, don't point out when things aren't working,
Hmm.
because if you point that out, you're going to end up, getting transferred to Alaska, or something, which is what the FBI likes to do. If you get in trouble, oh, we're going to send you up to Alaska. No,
Yeah.
it's career death. But we see that a lot. And I think we need to own that. I think part of what happens in the novel is that the human society and the ape society eventually figure out a way to live together as one society. And the reason they were able to do that is because they recognized what was not working and
Mm.
changed it. And that's a big thing for associations. They don't want to change what's not working because it's the way we've always done it. And you probably have seen that yourself.
Oh, many times, yeah. Yeah, and that sort of ties into, if someone has to ask, why do we do something this way? And you can't make that direct link to the mission statement or your vision statement, or whatever your guiding document is, however you refer to it, then you really need to ask yourself, oh, well, why are we doing it this way? Should we even be doing it? You know,
Right.
it's not always an obvious answer, and it's easy to get stuck in traditions. It's easy to get stuck in, pet projects that don't no longer make sense because whoever started it is no longer on the board. But
Mhm.
you just keep doing it, and
Yeah.
you just keep doing it because you've always done it.
That's right. Well, see, and the thing is, that's a great point, because if we keep doing things because it's the way we've always done it without understanding what we're doing, That's where we start to get in trouble. So I am all for tradition as long as we understand the background of the tradition and why we're doing it.
Hmm.
Because, in another one of the Charlton Heston Planet of the Apes movies, there's a whole group of people who live underground and worship a nuclear missile.
Mm.
Probably because they don't know what it is and why they're worshiping it. They're just, this is
Yeah.
what we do. We live underground. We're mutants. We don't go outside much. So how are you going to pass the day, right? Oh, well, look at this nice missile, which somehow still actually works. But anyway, that's the problem is if you don't understand why you're doing something or why we continue to do things. An example that maybe it isn't as relevant as it once was is why men wear ties.
Oh, yeah.
You probably know that story as well as I do.
Is it because it was to sort of close up so you wouldn't stink so much or something? That's what one person told me.
Well, that could be, but no, actually, the tie, while in the 18th century French court, might have been used to make you not smell so bad because people used to wear a lot of perfume. It's like the reason
And
men
not
wear,
bathe.
yeah, it's like, well, because ties are linked to when, men used to fight battles and you didn't have uniforms, so you wore a color. So you would
Mm.
tie a piece of cloth around your arm, or you might wear a lady's scarf to say, I'm fighting for her. When they created romantic and chivalric love
Mm.
in like the Middle Ages. But really, that's why men have that tradition of wearing ties because that was how you showed what side you were on. And it's
Mm.
why men shake hands today. Like people shake hands when they meet. Oh, hello, it's nice to meet you. Men traditionally have shaken hands because they're checking to see if you're hiding a weapon. But we
Mm.
pass these things down. We don't educate ourselves as to, well, this is a tradition born out of a time when, people used to carry. It's like people had swords or little daggers or things like that, especially in the Middle Ages when you had people fighting in hand to hand combat more than anything else because we didn't have guns at that point. So people have always fought with each other. It just depends on, the era, what you're going to use. But that's the thing is like these traditions we have, like why did we used to have fainting couches? Because
Mm.
ladies wore corsets and it cut off your air and you would get lightheaded and you'd fall over. That's why we had fainting couches. Now we have them, we call them like chaise lounges, and they seem, very luxurious and sophisticated, but they once had a very practical application,
Yeah.
so you're not falling on the floor and hitting your head. And so if we can understand a little bit of the history behind things and why we're doing that thing, it makes a lot easier to keep doing that thing and to understand why it makes sense or doesn't make sense. And once
Hmm.
the thing doesn't make sense anymore, we can just stop doing it.
Exactly. Yeah. And silencing people who ask those questions, it can help us redirect our organizations to what we should be doing or doing them better. Yeah, those are the people we need to keep around on staff.
I agree, especially being one of those people. It's always like, why are we doing this again?
My,
It doesn't make any sense. I think the funniest story I had about that sort of thing, it's a budget story too. Uh, I used to work at the American Academy of Otolaryngology, and I was doing my first budget. I worked with the board of governors at the time, and I'm looking at my budget. So I'm sitting with two of the senior staff people, and they had offered to help me with my budget and answer any questions. And really, the big question I had is, why do I have a cookie line item in my budget? For cookies, like the kind delicious kind that you like to eat, like
yeah.
whatever your favorite cookie is. And it turned out there was actually a good story behind that because it used to be the board of governors did not have a meal or food and beverage budget. And so one time they asked for coffee and cookies at one of their meetings, and they were told, no, you cannot have coffee and cookies at your meeting. They got really mad. There was a big blow up about it. So they added a cookie line item. And I said, well, that really makes a lot of sense. But now that I actually do have a food and beverage budget, can I just roll that in there? That for budget? And they said, oh, yeah, that's fine. You can do this. But that's where it all started because somebody was denied something
That's
and
funny.
they just threw a fit. Rightly so. I don't think there's anything wrong with, running by the store and getting a box of Entenmann's. Seriously. It's like your volunteers want a box of cookies, get them some cookies. It's not going to kill
Absolutely.
it's like that's being a good host too. So it's very interesting though. when you're looking also at Planet of the Apes, that story, because what you see is one society overtaking another. So you have the ape society rising while the human society fell, and then they replaced it. And you actually see that in associations. And you might be saying to yourself, Carl Cecilia, what are you talking about now? Well, I'll tell you, because I do like to go on. Because you were talking a lot about staff earlier, the
Hmm.
staff we want to keep, and then we need to educate new staff. But eventually, a staff is going to completely roll over. Just like, our friend Michael Butera always points out, the board that hires you is not the board you're going to be working with in 5 years if you're chief staff
Hmm.
executive or any senior leader for that matter. So what we see then is a new society replacing an older society. Really what we see, is that evolution within the members, within the staff, within board leadership. And we see that evolution and we tend to discount it. We don't pay attention to it
Hmm.
because, like, we see, like, I was on a networking call the other day and we were talking about, should associations announce staff arrivals and departures or not? And, generally, it's like this one specific example was no, we do neither.
Hmm.
But how are you supposed to know who to talk to? And that's a problem with communication
Hmm.
within an association, is that if you're not telling your members who to talk to, who's going to be supporting you, who's your point person for that information that you may or may not need, how are you supposed to find it? And how do you know who to call? But of course, if you call, you need a staff that's actually going to answer the phone. So, or answer their emails or answer their texts, which is another part of the communication problem, I think.
You're mentioning the staff turning over, or the board turning over. And I think something that the Planet of the Apes really missed the ball on is asking those questions like every 2 years. Like you don't need to redo your mission statement and your strategic plan every year or 5 years even necessarily, but you should
Mhm.
always be looking at it and saying, maybe have an annual review of it. Like, does this still make sense? Like, are we still on board? Is everyone on the board still on board? With what we're doing and why? You know,
Mhm.
those are questions often I've seen you just not asked for years. You know,
Mhm.
and that leads to doing the same thing over and over. And there's a fun quote that I like from I got this from uh, Joanna Pineda,
Mhm.
who she was talking. I don't know if she's really a huge fan of Kung Fu Panda, but she used like two quotes in one talk from Kung Fu Panda. And it was something like, if you never try, see now I'm gonna mess it up. But if I always do what I've always done, I'll never be more than anything I've ever been. Something like that. And I sorry, Joanne, I totally messed that up. But
I
the
think I'd
con
apologize to the script writer.
right. Yeah, I'm assuming she got it right. I don't know. But
Yeah,
the concept being, if you don't try stuff, you're never going to be better than you've ever been. You have to sometimes be uh, less risk averse and try new stuff, move people around in an organization a little bit and, try to do something new. Solve the same problems different ways, or maybe try to tackle new problems.
that's right. Yeah, exactly. Because you always have to be adapting. And that's why I really like the concept of adaptive leadership,
Mm-hmm.
which is something I talk about a lot with, boards that I work with or other volunteer leaders I work with, but also as people are getting ready for the CAE exam. We talk about adaptive leadership because it's very proactive. It's looking to the future. I know we like to use the word foresight now, trying to anticipate what might happen. Whereas, like, what you see in the Planet of the Apes is anything, it's completely opposite of adaptive leadership. It's very stagnant. Everything's very rigid. No, don't do anything different. Don't leave town because you might see something new. It's like, just stay
Yeah.
in town,
Yeah.
and things like that. And you really have to be looking around and trying different things, because I use the example of neckties as a tradition. We don't really remember why we do it anymore, but that's why there's no necktie association anymore. because they were not responsive to Casual Friday when that came out 30 years ago. So there you go. It's
Hmm.
like now they don't wear ties on Planet of the Apes, but they do wear uniforms of different kinds. So
Yeah.
but what's kind of funny is they ride horses like humans, which is kind of like Mickey Mouse owning a dog. But then his best friend's also a dog. As it gets confusing, and you start anthropomorphizing stuff. I got to quit
Yeah.
saying more than 3-syllable words. But when we start doing that, it's like it gets confusing. But that's really one of the things, though, is to your point, we're not adapting, we're not trying new things, and therefore we become stagnant. When we become stagnant, then we just keep going back to that's the way we've always done it.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's, in saying that's how we've always done it is a perfectly understandable explanation, but it's not a satisfactory one,
Mhm.
you know?
Yes, that I love that. You're right. Understandable, but not satisfactory.
Yeah. Yeah. So how can we
Excellent.
change things? Can we
Yeah.
do this better?
And don't just change things to change things, change
Yeah.
them because there's a good reason to change things. Sometimes there's no good reason to change things. Like when I was a chief staff executive at a nursing home administrators organization years ago, the board said, "We think you need to get rid of our accounting firm." And I was like, "Well, okay, let's look into that." So went through an RFP process, talked to several different groups, and it turned out, no, actually, they were the right one for us. But
Mhm.
we had to go talk to other people and we had to investigate. And so that's okay too if you confirm that what you're doing is the best thing. There's nothing wrong with that, but you shouldn't just keep doing it blindly
Right. Yeah.
and understand it. Yeah, we have to understand it. So, well, I don't know how you feel about your question, Carl, but I think we may have exhausted this example.
I think we hit on a lot of good points there, but how does it interact, that society interact with its own chapters and its chapter governance?
That's a good point because there is a they don't necessarily have chapters, but looking back at that stratified society that they have, there's a lot of tension, as we mentioned earlier. There's a lot of tension between the groups. And that's what you see a lot between associations and chapters, if they have them. Of course, not everybody has chapters, but whether you have components that are special interest groups or committees, or maybe you have a lot of task forces and working groups, if they're doing the work of the association, if they're not well integrated into the society of the association, because we all have a society in our association, our own traditions, how we do things, how we talk to each other. If your role's not clear, then there's going to be tension. And then what you want, though, is positive tension, not negative
Hmm.
tension. And what I've seen a lot over the years as a chapter relations director is there's a lot of negative tension, and
Hmm.
there doesn't need to be. And when I say positive tension, that's the tension that comes from people caring. So it's like tension is what holds a bridge up, and
Hmm.
tension is what holds our muscles up so that we can walk and stand. If there were no tensions in our muscles, we wouldn't be able to move. And so tension's not a bad thing, it's just energy. So I talk about this a lot. Yes, folks, here's a flagrant plug for my book. Yes, I talk about that a lot in my book, Association Chapter Systems, which Carl,
Nice.
if you're listening, Carl is holding up a copy, Association Chapter Systems from Frustrating to Fruitful. Because yes, Carl and I mentioned this book every chance we get. But it's on a personal note, it was a lifelong goal of mine to write a book, and now I've written one and I'm planning to write more. So it's great. But coming back to the chapter example within associations, and then that tension that we have recognized in the Planet of the Apes, it's not just between the apes and the humans. There's a lot of tensions between the apes because they have different goals, and they're maybe not all working together. So if you have that with your chapters or whatever your components are, again, they could be committees, they could be special interest groups. You could have regional groups instead of a local chapter, quote unquote. You might work with a lot of affiliates, which is not the same thing as chapters. But that tension can be good. But I feel a lot of times I am going to say feel at this point because a lot of it's emotion, because
Hmm.
people invest emotional energy into the organization. But I also see a lot of times that there's negative tension when there doesn't need to be.
Hmm.
And that all comes directly from how we manage our relationships with each other. If we're going to come in and be open and not be dictatorial, which I have seen some groups during my career, places I've worked where they're dictatorial with people and bordering on draconian with some of
Hmm.
these requirements. And it's like, come on, they're volunteers. You can't give them a 40-hour work week on top of whatever else they're doing in the rest of their life. So when we're looking at that, we really want that input, we want that support, we want those interactions and those connections. And again, tension's not a bad thing. It's only bad if they stop talking to you.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one organization I had a volunteer leadership role in, and the guy who's sort of above me in this chain of volunteers, he said, Carl, we need you to go to this event. I said, well, I can't go to that. He says, well, you have to. I said, you want to bet on that? I bet I don't have to do anything. Yeah.
That's
And as a result, so there's a little back and forth. You know what they did? They lost a volunteer.
wow.
Yeah, it's like, well, I guess I don't really have to do any of this stuff. So, I'll see you later.
That's an excellent point, Carl. We should not be demanding of our volunteers for that reason. They don't
Hmm.
have to be there and they don't have to be doing anything. And without them, you're not going to have an association. You're not going to have a group that's successful in making things happen. So, no, it's a choice. They're making a choice. And I really don't think we always honor that choice.
Hmm.
Because we feel like, well, they're not doing what I tell them. I can't control them. I hear that a lot about chapters. I can't control them. They won't do what I want. And it's like, well, because they're grown-ups.
Yeah, I mean, are you really going to dictate that your volunteers have to attend some event? Like, I don't think I was going to have to take time off work, but I mean, I have other stuff that I do in my life, other than free labor for this organization, you know?
Right. Exactly. Because it's like everything's a choice. And I think that when we're looking at associations, that's your association membership is not a requirement.
Hmm.
They don't need to belong. I belong to several different groups. I don't need to belong. I choose to belong. And when it gets to the point where I feel it's not valuable anymore, I won't belong anymore. Because I have, like you, quit a couple of groups for that reason. Like, I wasn't told I had to go somewhere, but I belonged to one association where they basically treated us like unpaid staff when we were
Yeah.
supposed to be volunteers. And they're like, well, you have to do this, you have to do that. And I'm like, actually, I'm a volunteer relations director. I don't have to do any of this.
Yeah.
And I don't have to be a member either. And so when my membership was up, I didn't renew. And I told them why.
Hmm.
So it's really, people are talking about like Joanna, you mentioned Joanna earlier, so we'll keep taking her name in vain. She's been talking about the membership cliff with people because of people retiring and changing jobs, or maybe the company they work for in your industry or profession's been bought. I know a lot of people are upset about private equity right now. But if maybe we won't have a membership cliff if we're a little more responsive to what people are actually looking for in the 21st century, because people do things differently, we live differently, we have a different worldview. uh People can just go live solo. They don't need to be part of a group. That's actually kind of a disturbing trend in society, which is probably a topic for another show. But yeah, people don't have to do anything except die. And with the
Yeah.
advances in cryogenics, we may not even need to do that anymore.
No, that's true. Yeah. Yeah. We could be like Walt Disney, having our heads frozen or something. I don't know if that's true, but
Did he do
certainly,
that really?
certainly part of popular cryogenics lore, of which we could have a whole episode on that, I'm sure.
Yeah,
But
cryogenic lore. Yeah, okay. I just personally, I know they're still working on the science, but right now, And yes, the cryogenic industry, if they happen to listen to this, will be upset. I think it's a big scam to freeze someone's body and make them think you can wake them up at some point in the future. We're not there. We weren't there 50 years ago when they started doing this. It's just not possible.
Yeah, I was talking to my dad about aging last night. I was on the phone with him, and I mentioned geez, I can't remember who wrote this poem about Ulysses, about how he, I think it was Coleridge, but I'm not sure, that about how he wanted to live forever, and so he does, but he sees his kids die and their grandkids, and he just becomes more decrepit. Like his body's aging, more and more, but he can't, but he'll never die. Yeah.
Wow. That's
What a
like a
horrible,
curse.
I mean, yeah, I mean, no one, I don't think many people look forward to death, but man, I wouldn't want to live forever.
No, I no. It's like, well, yeah, okay, so now we're veering off into other parts unknown here, but it's sort of like that Queen song that they wrote for the Highlander movie, Who Wants to Live Forever?
Mm,
And, and kind of bringing it back, to our topic of Planet of the Apes and associations, it's like no association lives forever either. They go away or they merge, or maybe they change their identity, they evolve into something else.
hmm.
And it's very much like the Planet of the Apes story. Human society died,
Yeah,
even though there were still humans. Nothing lasts forever. Was just I'm probably like one of the last people in America to watch Gladiator 2. I just watched it recently. The Roman Empire, it was around for so long, but even that didn't last forever. And it did change and evolve and morph into something very different from how it started. So nothing lasts forever. So if we want our associations to have a long, healthy life and age well, then we need to think a little bit differently. And again, bringing it back to our question of Planet of the Apes, it's like don't be stratified, don't be exclusionary, don't keep people in a role because you think that's where they belong. Find out where they actually belong, and find a
hmm.
way to live together peacefully.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's a good model for life too. Try
Hmm.
to get along, figure out how we fit in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly, because we all have more in common than we don't.
Hmm. Exactly.
So the whole division thing and the caste system really in the Planet of the Apes is what they have when you think about it. And human caste systems don't work well either.
Hmm.
And it just denies us our sense of self and our own individual identity.
Yeah, exactly.
So, well, Carl, you've been on a couple times and we've
This is
always
my
had
third
like
time, I think, and I always enjoy talking with you. I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I have a lot of fun with our conversations, and I think this one's a kind of a lighthearted take on association. So, since you've been on a couple times, I always ask people, "What's the one thought you'd like the audience to take away today of all these many thoughts?" And then, if they wanted to get in touch with you and find out what else you think about Planet of the Apes, or maybe how to publish their own book with your company, how can they get in touch?
Sure thing. Yeah. So one of the big things I keep coming back to is embracing the people who ask you why you're doing things. And one of the authors, speaking of publishing, one of the authors I've worked with on handful of books anyway, is David Potts, and he's this really smart guy, and I love just being near him and hearing the things that come out of his mouth, that they're so intelligent. But he told me once, he said, when he had a long career in the Air Force, and he says, when I was a young lieutenant, and I'd ask, well, why do we do things this way? He said, I was branded an upstart. And wasn't really listened to. And he says, but you know what? Eventually I was a colonel and I asked, why do we do things this way? And I was a visionary. Yeah. But if anybody wants to get in touch with me, you can contact me, find me on LinkedIn or email me at cweaver@brokencolumnpress.com. We're always looking for new people to work with, and we'd like to help you achieve your dreams by publishing a book together.
Oh, that's great. Well, and it worked for me, so I can endorse Broken Column Press.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Well deserved.
Mm.
And looking forward to our next book together.
Yeah, that's going to be great.
Yeah, I got a couple cooking out there, folks, but we'll see. So,
Don't go cooking your books though. Don't. That's a bad metaphor, I guess.
no, no, I know. I do not do that. I actually don't cook much of anything anymore. My husband does the cooking. So, he cooks all our meals, does the grocery shopping. It's awesome. So, because our other mutual friend, Barbara Armentrout, said
Mhm.
something that she had to go make dinner. And I was like, well, I thought your husband made dinner. And she's like, oh no, that's just a couple, like one night a week he makes dinner. I'm like, oh, all right, because in my worldview, I think all husbands make dinner. It's just me. It's the way
Yeah,
I.
that's what I did when I was married. So yeah,
Well, you still like to cook a lot.
I do. I love cooking. I love cooking, and I make all sorts of different things, like trying new stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
I used to like to cook, but my husband's so much better at it than I am. I'm just like, no,
fun.
that we have that kind of relationship. Like we do what we're good at. So I'm like,
Hmm.
hey, I'm good at washing the dishes. That's what I do. So like you cook, I wash the dishes. So we have
Yeah.
a good division of labor, which again is a great wrap up for make sure everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing and put them in the job that they have the best skill fit for. So
Hmm.
some other words to live by there. So, well, everybody, we've gone way out into left field in this conversation, and now we have to go rogue and wrap up this particular episode. But I want to thank Carl Weaver of Broken Column Press for coming on and having this great conversation about a really fun topic.
Yeah.
And
Thanks for having me. It was a great time.
you're welcome, and you'll be back.
I hope so.
So we'll find another fun topic. People always laugh when I tell them we talk about Godzilla a lot. I can't fit him in this episode. Well, we have to go rogue for now. But thank you for joining us. And again, please don't forget to subscribe or follow us on your favorite service because you don't want to miss any more of these kind of conversations. And if you'd like to learn more about Rogue Tulips Consulting and how we can help your organization bloom outside the box, please check out our website and then let's have a conversation because we'd love to work with you. And if you are getting ready for the CAE exam or another kind of credentialing exam, our study group courses start this week. Our first session's Tuesday, February 4th, 2025. We are happy to take late registrants. So if you would like to sign up within the first 6 weeks, we take people up to the halfway point of our 12-week course. So check out our education page at roguetulips.com/education. Thanks again for joining us. And on behalf of Carla and myself, we'll see you next time. That's it for this week. I hope you really loved this episode as much as I did. Thanks for listening. Learn more about how our experience and knowledge at Rogue Tulips can give your organization the strategic edge to reach its goals. Check out our website at roguetulips.com. We'd love to talk with you and see how we can work together. Thanks.